All right, so do you guys see my screen okay?
Looks good.
Okay, so let's go with that. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation. I really, based on what Erin told me, I decided to go something that is like, very general presentation of the work I've been doing for the past 9 years now. So yeah, very much a primer. And oh yeah, my family name is Robinne. So like, think about the little bird. And like, yeah, kind of a robin. So just a quick note. Sorry about that. All right. So my hope is that by the end of this talk, at the end of those 45 minutes or so, you're going to have a general understanding of what water security is, how forests contribute to our water security throughout the country, and how fires, impact this water security. Most of the time, like our thinking is that it impacts water security in a negative way. It can also, as we will see in the watershed protection section, it can also be beneficial to water security, and we'll try to understand how. And I'll go quickly over some, a bit of the fire history of the Shuswap Basin. It's very, very general again, but once again, I hope it fits, it meets your needs. All right, so let's start with like trying to understand how forests contribute to our freshwater supply. And okay, I'm having. Okay, sorry about that. I'm having some computer issues lately, kind of unexpected, but it seems to be okay. All right, so here is a very simplified schematic view of a forest on a hill slope and what happens when it rains. And you see here those arrows. It's supposed to represent what we call rainfall partitioning. So when it rains, it's not like all the water gets to the ground. Like the canopy is going to intercept a part of this water, and like when I say intercept, it's going to kind of collect it, like stop it and slow it down, and it meets in this respect, it has like forest has a function of a sort of a shield. It will protect the ground from the impact of raindrops, and so it will limit erosion. So that's the first thing. So a part of this water that has been intercepted by vegetation is going to be re-emitted, so evaporated, but a part of it will go down the trees, like through what we call through fall and stem flow. So a part of this water is going to reach the floor. And imagine a healthy forest with usually a healthy forest, like people think about trees, but actually the forest soil is probably is at least as important. And so when you have a healthy forest, you have well-developed soil with litter, humus, and several what we call horizons that are able to capture this water that is reaching the ground. So capture it and like suck it in so the water can percolate and gets into the soil. What you see here, this big blue oval shape, is like the forest will be able to store this water. This is what we call the sponge effect. And because of this sponge effect, there is this water stored here. And little by little, I say the forest, but like really like the watershed is going to be able to release a part of this water downstream to the river and create participate to what we call the base flow. So what makes, when it's not raining, what makes the river flow, it's what is stored down in the ground, and forests contribute to the storage. And finally, there is this, what we call this filter effect. So when it goes through the floor, once again, I said like the forest floor, the forest soil is probably as important as the trees themselves, because a healthy soil has a structure that makes it able to capture a number of particles, including pollutants, so nitrogen, phosphorus, but also heavy metals, and a number of sediments as well, because I said it's protecting from erosion. So that's a simplified view, but what is important here is to get those processes. That part of the water is intercepted and goes back, but what reaches the ground, either like most of it gets stored, and a part of it goes to runoff. Runoff actually usually is not necessarily in forested areas, it's not a big component of what I call this water partitioning. So keep in mind those effects like the shield, the sponge, and the filter effect. That's what forests provide us, and that make forests, great in terms of freshwater supply. And we actually have very good documents showing that cities in the world that depend on upstream forested catchments for their drinking water supply tend to have much cheaper water than communities that just don't have this sort of upstream healthy forested watersheds. Okay, it keeps doing this. Okay, so so like I was describing those functions and processes, and once we get this, this water down the river, what does the forest essentially do is like it provides what we call ecosystem services and benefits. So you have like what the watershed, like functions of the watershed, and us downstream, we're pretty happy because the forest will regulate our water supply. It will avoid, it will protect us from floods most of the time at least. It will make sure we have pretty good water quality. It will make sure that we can benefit from water for, let's say, fishing, recreational activities, and obviously drinking water supply, and especially cheaper drinking water supply. And because we have so much forest in Canada, it's pretty easy to think that, okay, we have so much forest, we must have pretty good water. And yeah, sure, that is absolutely true. Here on this map, you can see that's the forest cover in the water catchments of Canada. So here, that's what we call HUG 12. That's just a way to classify the catchments over the country. And HUG 12, like it's catchments that are essential, like pretty much 10 kilometers long by 5 kilometers wide. And there are 72,000 of those catchments covering Canada. So yeah, as you can see, we do have a fair bit of a forest in Canada, and so this is quite logical that we have this. We do agree with, there is general acceptance that forests contribute to the Canadian freshwater supply, but it is not only that. When it comes to water security, it's not only like forests provide water and good water quality. And I come from France. And I can definitely tell you, I'm sorry, this is not BC, this is Lake Louise in Alberta. And but this sums up the vision we have across the world, and that a lot of Canadians have as well, of what forest and water go together in Canada. Just like plenty of water because we have plenty of forest, and vice versa. But reality is that water security is much more complicated than just forest is providing us with good water quality or with a lot of water. It actually gets into what we call, so water security is the capacity to access a good amount of good quality water to fulfill the daily capacities of individuals or of societies, to fulfill their daily needs. So let's say when it comes to household water security, is the capacity for you to turn on the tap and have drinking water. Is the capacity to provide water for irrigation. It's the capacity to have enough water, enough distribution capacity so our cities can keep growing and keep our citizens healthy. What we call also environmental water security, which here connects to the health of our watersheds themselves, our streams, and our aquatic habitats. And finally, this is where I come in. Like when it comes to the resilience to water-related disasters, like you need to be able to access this good quality water in the quantity you need, but also on the long term, you need to be sure that this water supply is protected from a number of threats. Most of the time in Canada, especially, we've been thinking for the longest time about floods, and it's probably the main issue across the world. We're increasingly thinking about droughts, especially in the prairies. And more, obviously, we're talking about fire. And this is where, as I said, I come in as a risk geographer. I'm not an aquatic biologist. I'm not a drinking water engineer. I'm not a hydrologist. My job is to collect data, to put them together and trying to see what the pattern, trying to detect the pattern where you guys might be at risk, why that, and how can I provide, like, where are those catchments and what kind of solutions can I provide, and use some sort of software, to provide solutions to reduce the risk. But once again, it's very interesting in Canada when we talk about water. I mean, not even talking about water security per se, just talking about water. And there is this idea that we have so much that we probably pretty like quite fine, like in terms of water security. We have in Canada 20% of the world freshwater, but we only have 6% of the renewable freshwater, in which renewable freshwater is like the amount of water that is renewed on a yearly basis. So basically what comes as rain that run off through the rivers and enrich the ocean, we get 6% of this amount of water on a yearly basis. So we do have quite a bit of water, but it doesn't mean that we have no water security issues. And you guys are probably aware of like so many of those different issues come from last year. So like the issues of drinking water supply in Iqaluit because of drinking water pollution, the droughts in the prairies, and my father-in-law is a farmer, and it was definitely it's every year we talk about issues of drought, but it was pretty bad this year. Some farms had to sell their cattle. Obviously, the floods in BC last fall following the forest fires, and also the topic like salmon. Salmon is a big topic across Canada. It's $2.5 billion for the Canadian economy. So all of those things relate to water security issues. And another growing problem that impacts me directly in my everyday job is like data. I'm a researcher. I work with data, and especially because I'm a geographer and working at the scale of Canada, I need data covering the whole country. Problem is, well, as you can see here, the data covering our catchments in Canada, that is not so great. As you can read here, data deficiencies, outcropping health threats are impacting most watersheds in Canada. I think BC is pretty well off, but we have people in those other places, especially like in a lot of northern communities, in which we hardly have much data. So this is a problem when it comes to water security as well. How do we monitor it, and how we can address some issues like forest fires? The good thing is, it's changing. Like when I started to work on that almost 10 years ago, it was so hard to find any sort of mention of fire in water documentation, big water reports. Like usually the fire scientists and fire related reports, they would mention water, not in very like a lot of details, but they would mention it. But like water reports or health reports, like would not mention water issues related to wildfires. But it's changing. Like here, this is like a very the brand new. It's like 1 month old or something like that. This report from Health Canada. It's in open access. And they go at length on the problem of wildfires and how they can impact the health of Canadians, and because wildfires have this capacity to impact water security. Here, that's 2019 from the University of Saskatchewan, and that's Global Water Futures. It's the research partnership for which I worked during my postdoc. Same thing, a lot of increasingly we talk about fires, and there is especially an interesting number here. It's like since the 2016 fire in Fort McMurray, the unplanned, like the extra costs of water treatment reached 10 million. So like usually like in Fort McMurray, it's around $500,000 for water treatment per year, but since 2016, they had to pay like $10 million more over what they usually pay on a yearly basis. So that's quite a lot of money. And then I'm pretty sure you are all aware of what's going on right now. Like it's been in the news quite a lot, like the watershed security strategy and found. It's ongoing, and I'm really looking forward to see where it's going to go. But I think And what wildfire has a big place in this watershed security strategy. So I think it's looking good in the sense that wildfires are gonna get a lot of exposure, and they're gonna be, that's my hope, taken care of in source watersheds. All right. So now, what happens when there is a fire? Here, this is a picture of the Cameron Falls. So the Cameron Falls are in southern Alberta, in the Waterton National Parks, and usually this is a waterfall that is like crystal blue. And in 2017, we had the Kino fire. You can see here like some burned trees. And the first rainfall afterward, that's what you got. Like that's what we call the flush. The first flush, you have just a lot of ashes, and the water turns into this kind of muddy soup that obviously nobody wants to drink, and that is not crystal clear anymore. But something I want to say about fire in Canada, fire is very much a part of our landscape. Like our forest, most of our forests in Canada are fire dependent to an extent. Some are, which means, like when I say fire dependent, it means that they need fire to stay healthy. And it depends where you are in Canada. Some forests, like in the boreal, for instance, parts of the boreal, they need like to burn every 80 years, 100 years or so. Some parts of BC historically needed to burn every 10 to 20 years. Some other forests need to burn every like 400 years. But this dependence to fire and this fire activity is divided. Like we can divide it in Canada in around like 60, like pretty much 60 what we call fire regime units. So that's what you see on this map here. That's what you see on this map here. What is a fire regime? A fire regime is the historical fire activity for a given area. So there is like the fire activity, like the fire frequency itself, but there is also like how much area it usually burns. Does it burn with high severity, medium severity, low severity? Does it burn in spring, in summer, in fall? So all this kind of like what we call metrics are important to define what we call a fire regime. So like once again, you have those 60 fire regime units in Canada. So all those units have a different way of burning, but still they need to burn. And like we have a very common saying in fire ecology that says biodiversity begets biodiversity. This biodiversity, that's what you can see here, those 60 different ways of forest to burn. But you can also see biodiversity at the scale of a catchment or just a burn, I guess. So here, for instance, like you can see here on the right, it's not very clear, but you have a H here for high severity fire. So everything was burned. You have medium severity where you have burned trees interspersed with live trees. And here you have the thalweg here that didn't burn. So that's the kind of, as well, again, of biodiversity that you have. And I just wanted to talk about that because like fire is not one and only, and it can be very complex, but also helps to keep our forests healthy, because it's not like just it burns what you're usually going to see on the news. It's like a moonscape, like it's like, oh, everything is black and nothing is alive anymore. This is not the reality. I just wanted to say that. And part of my job is like, trying to connect this knowledge we have of fire activity across Canada and our watersheds, and what is the historical fire activity in those watersheds, and how we can use that to start to provide new insights to dealing with water security from, or dealing with fire from a water security perspective. And that's something I published a couple of years ago, when very simple thing like using the catchments. All those watersheds here are what we call sub watersheds. That's the finest official, like federal level of watershed, management scale or governance scale for watersheds in Canada. And as I said, like forests are burning, they need to burn on a regular basis, but it means that by extension, like mechanically, it means that our watersheds are burning and need to burn on a regular basis as well. So that's why I mean that fires can be beneficial to water security, but we also have to learn to deal with fire in our watersheds, because we have forests that need to burn. And what happens after a burn? Well, it's the same, the same diagram I showed before, just with a few modifications here. Still the same rainfall, the same rain coming in, but because now there are just no trees, no canopy to intercept, to collect this water, that the shield effect has disappeared. And because it has disappeared, we have like raindrops coming full speed on the ground. And because usually with a high severity fire, we also have no forest soil anymore. You have the mineral soil, no organic matter because it burns. So like the soil structure usually has collapsed. So you have ashes, like pretty loose soil particles, and you have raindrops like coming in like full speed, and stuff like erosion is going up quite a bit. Usually we have soil moisture that tends to increase a little bit because, well, we don't have trees anymore to suck the water in. So we have some storage that happens just under the surface, but not that much. So the sponge effect as well disappeared. Remember what I said, like you need to have this healthy soil, this water coming through the canopy slowly to get absorbed, to get sucked in and percolate. Once again, you don't have the trees, you don't have the vegetation, you don't have the soil anymore. So this capacity to absorb the water is like highly degraded. Especially now you have an issue that is called hydrophobicity or water repellency that you probably heard last year after the fire during the floods in BC. That you have some sort of a layer that comes from the precipitation of gases that go downwards in the ground, and when those gases reach a cooler soil layer, they just precipitate and create this kind of coating around the soil particles. So it creates like this kind of armor, this waterproof layer, and so the water that comes in as well just can't percolate and just goes downhill as well. So you remember maybe in this first figure with a healthy or live forest, like the runoff arrow was pretty small. Here you see it's pretty big because water can percolate, nothing is intercepted, nothing goes back to the atmosphere. So essentially all the water coming from the sky goes downhill. And because there is nothing to protect the soil, it also usually goes down with mud, sediments, ashes, and you don't have this kind of pristine river anymore. So the sponge effect is gone, the filter effect is gone. It's not only because of the sediments we have, like usually those soils also collect a number of, as I said, like chemical elements, chemical compounds. So nutrients, sediments, heavy metals, and those things as well, but usually they bond it to the sediment. So when everything is eroded, all those things end up in the river as well. So all those functions of shield, sponge, and filter just basically disappear. In the worst case scenario, obviously, as I said, like not all fires are burning everything and transform the forest in a moonscape. Usually we tend to say that at least 20% of a catchment needs to burn at medium to high severity, so like to get like this kind of result here, and needs to be followed by heavy precipitation. And I mean, ideally, like in the worst case scenario, it's also like located on pretty rugged terrain, like hill slopes like that, so where erosion can happen much more easily. So just a few pictures to illustrate what I was saying here. You see like here this a pretty high severity fire. You don't like, or at least like patch. You see like you don't have anything left. You can see that the ground was burned as well, and it's even more obvious here. Ashes, no soil anymore, like soil in the sense of no litter, no humus anymore. Like you get to the mineral soil right away mixed with ashes. Here, that's the example of what I was saying, like hydrophobicity. You can see here, that's a very common test that we use actually to look at the absorption capacity of the soil. We just put like a drop of water, that's the drop test, the water drop test. And you see it just not going through because all those soil particles are coated once again with this kind of waxy type of layer. We have changes in snow accumulation, which is pretty important in Canada. Many of our catchments are snow dominated, which means that the water that comes downstream is highly influenced by how much snow we get upstream and how much snow we have and when it melts. And the problem with fires is that it tends to, for very large fires, it tends to limit the amount of snow that is accumulated, and it makes the snow melt much earlier as well, which can create issues when trying to manage how much water we get, especially at the end of the warm season, when usually the water demand is the highest. And an increased worry we have comes with smoke. Especially smoke in unburned basin. Like here, it's very hazy, and we realize that smoke deposition can change water quality quite a bit, even if the catchment is not burned at all. So it's we are giving more and more attention to this problem as well. All right, so as I said, you have those different type of changes to the forest, and comes the rain, or snow as well as I said, can be a problem because the accumulation and the melt of snow changes. But really the biggest, like the worst case scenario, is really like a rainstorm right after a big fire. And that some of the very recent wildfire impacts on our water supply came in this kind of situation. In Australia, a couple of years ago, that's really what happened. So yeah, as I said again, like the kind of recipe for the wildfire / water disaster: 20% area burn, medium high severity, followed by a rainstorm. And this is the kind of effect you can see. Here you see that there is somebody here in the middle. That was in Montana. That's a gully after a rainstorm in a burned area. And here we're not talking just sediments. We're talking rocks, boulders. Like when you have this kind of muddy water, like the capacity of this kind of water to more mud actually, to transport and carry downstream like pretty big amounts of material is actually quite phenomenal. Here, that's the Cameron fire. That's what I was talking about. So you have the issues of erosion. You have the issues of flash flooding. As I said, like there is nothing anymore to slow down the water coming from the sky, and there is also like most of this water won't be absorbed as well. So all of this water is running off downstream with all this ash, all those sediments, but it goes so much faster that it reaches downstream much faster as well. So you have those flash floods that can happen and can be very destructive. And finally, you have the issue of changes to water quality. You have more ashes, you have like nutrients that come in, in ecosystems generally are limited by the availability of phosphorus and nitrogen. So those two nutrients really can really control how much life how much like biological activity can actually take place. And after a fire, we can have so much more nitrogen and phosphorus that aquatic habitats, especially algae, are pretty happy with that. And you start to see in some places like this kind of gooey like layer of algae just like covering like still water, or start to develop around rocks in the rivers. So yeah, because changes to water quality and excessive nutrients. What does it mean downstream? We have all those changes, and we have all this kind of dirty water coming in like high speed, very destructive power, and what it gives is like what we call wildfire watershed risk, which is like very much like, which is my work. That's what I do on a daily basis, trying to figure out what this is. And as you can see here, those risks are manifold. Like we have here issues of landslide, debris flows, and I think I understand that for this in the Shuswap, that's definitely an increasing concern, and for good reasons. In Southern California in 2018, there was a landslide in the community, in the Montecito community. it killed 23 people, cost, I think it's $15 million in insurance claims. So that's a real issue. We had another one that comes to impacts on aquatic habitats. Usually when we have more sediments and ashes, we have a drop in dissolved oxygen in the water. So, well, fish die just because they can't breathe anymore. We increasingly are concerned with what we call the wildland urban interfaces, and you probably heard of this word. Maybe you heard of this word, like when we call that WUI, the wildland urban interface, because we have those burns happening, and a lot of those things that burn, like plastic and PFAS, you name it, like all kind of those scary things that you hear in the news about all those kind of pollutants that we engineered, and that get burned and can run off to the river systems nearby. And we only started to do some science on that, but like some of the things that can happen, we think can be pretty nasty, like triggering concentration of carcinogenic elements. So it's very new aspect that we're trying to address. Here you see that's a small reservoir in Southern California that gives drinking water to a small community, that provides drinking water to small communities. And usually that's a small lake, but here it's filled in with sediments coming from upstream burnt areas. And that can cost a whole lot of money to clean that. Like after the Hammond fire in Colorado in 2002, the city of Denver had to pay, well, the estimates always change, but like something in between $30 million to $60 million to clean their water reservoir. Here, another problem that can arise for drinking water provision or wastewater is that because there is so much erosion, pipes can be damaged. Like you have one actually that is damaged here. This one is probably not in good shape either. And what keeps me busy the most lately, and that is probably the highest profile in Canada when it comes to wildfires and water security, is drinking water. Here you see like it's water that drinking water utilities might have to treat after a fire, and it costs much more money. Usually you don't have necessarily a risk per se to people, like you won't be delivered polluted water, but you will be delivered clean water, but it will be much more costly to produce. And in the end, that means that the bill for taxpayers is going to be higher. All right, I think now that I hope you have a fairly good understanding of the generalities when it comes to forest, fires, water security, I just wanted to do something very brief over the Shuswap. And I don't know you guys Catchments, and I didn't visit BC enough, but it looks like very cool place. So that was actually nice for me to go over that and look at it. And it's actually quite a forested catchment. Like most of the catchment is covered by vegetation, which then I understand that it can burn quite a bit. And here on the right, I just wanted to provide kind of approach this overview from a risk lens. That's what I do, risk analysis. So like here are a few values at risk, like in dark blue and like different shades of blue, but dark blue mostly is like salmon habitats that is under high pressure from forest disturbances. Here in orange, like those triangles are municipal water licenses. They're not all connected to utilities, but they are municipal water licenses, and many of them, they are used to produce drinking water. And here in orange, like this kind of lines, it's a number of watersheds that are that host sensitive habitats. So that's just like an example of a few values at risk, values that can be impacted in case of a fire. The great thing is like BC has a lot of other data and data sets, some of them that I couldn't access while I was preparing that. But just to illustrate that you do have a number of values at risk, so a number of values to be protected in the watershed. And here, that's the fire activity from 1986 to 2020 that comes from our federal data set. It's called the National Burnt Area Composite. So it comes from data from the provinces, mixed with data from satellite imagery. And this is 2021. The source of the source is different because we are still working on having very refined perimeters as we have here. So that comes from satellite imagery that is not as I guess the resolution is not the same as what we used here, but still, we had in just 1 year we burned almost 3 times what was burned in 35 precedent years. So I can absolutely fully understand that you do have concerns, especially just by looking at some of where those fires burn. Some of them burn pretty close to a number of water bodies that I assume are important in terms of various water security issues, like drinking water supply or recreational activities. And you might ask, okay, why did that happen? Well, this is a paper that was published last year, and yeah, and I know the graph looks a bit scary, but it's actually the only thing you need to understand here is those black triangles show a fire, and what you can see here is up until essentially the early 90s, when we started to really go to really implement aggressive fire exclusion policies, aggressive fire suppression. We went from fires that were burning, forests that were burning on every 10 to 30 years, and it's around Williams Lake, so it's just a little bit further up north from you guys, but it's the same kind of settings. So the forest used to burn quite often at low to mixed severity, and then we started to implement fire exclusion, aggressive fire suppression, and essentially your watersheds didn't burn in a century, or maybe let's say you had a fire mid severity fire in the 50s, so that means at least 70 years it didn't burn 70 years when it used to burn every 10 to 30 years. And so when it doesn't burn, well, the vegetation keeps growing. As I said earlier, we need those forests to burn on a regular basis because fires keep those forests in check. If it doesn't burn, the fuel start to accumulate, and you have those overstocked forests, and it's a problem all across Canada because then you have a lot of fuel. And when you have too much trees, when you have too much fuel, you have competition for water. So you start to have trees that gets even drier, more susceptible to pests, and so they die. And so they're drier, and they are even more susceptible to fire. So that's why in the end, we get this kind of huge conflagrations that you guys have seen. That's the results of a century of fire exclusion. But what I want you to understand is that it's not we are clueless and that we have no way of dealing with that. Well, and you guys here, what you see on this map is a number of data point. And why is that important? Well, it's because we start to work with data. Data is at the core of what scientists do, and that's at the core of management. You can't manage what you don't know. And the great thing in the Shuswap is that here, just a few examples. I put some of the municipal water licenses again, because municipal utilities have data about some of the about the raw water that comes in. Here you have a number of data points, those green points, about it's stream sampling, stream water quality sampling. In blue, those squares are gauges, stream hydrology gauges from Water Survey of Canada. And what I mean, is that you have enough data right now in the Shuswap to be able to monitor the effect of those fires. And start to get an understanding of how those fires might change the hydrology, the water quality, maybe some of the nutrient loads and susceptibility to landslide throughout your watershed. But once you have all those data, you will be able to get a better understanding of what's going on in your watershed, and then you can start to develop some mitigation measures and protect your water resources. And a big part of that is trying to put fire back into the system. And when I say that, I want to make a quick comment here, and I don't want to be I assume a number of people in the audience, maybe had to be evacuated, maybe lost things during those past fire seasons in BC, and I really don't want to sound like dismissive or disrespectful. I'm not saying that we need more of the same fire. We don't need those big conflagrations. We need to have the good fire back into the system, and I'm going to tell you what it is. In Eastern Europe, we say that fire is a good servant but a bad master, and that's really essentially what those two diagrams here mean. Like before mostly before Euro Canadians came into the picture, we had balanced fire regime, so either natural fire going through the forest or the use of fire by indigenous communities. And so forest and fire were in pretty good balance. So we had healthy forests with healthy watersheds that were contributing to water security. And then came all those, during the 19th century, came this epoch of fire exclusion, aggressive fire suppression. And so we switched to what we call an anthropogenic or human-driven fire regime that led to overstocked forests, unhealthy forests, unhealthy watersheds, and leading to now issues of water insecurity. And if you have the chance, go take a look at the Mountain Legacy project, because it is here. It's once again it's in Alberta, but they have a few spots in BC, and that shows that the evolution of the forest cover since during the 20th century. Here, that's the picture in 1914. Here's the same picture at this. It's a picture at the same spot 1 century later, and you can see that the forest at the time was around here, and now it comes up to here and actually been burnt as well. And it's another way of illustrating the effect of fire exclusion. We have so much more forest and so much more fuel, so our watersheds are much more prone to fire. And that's what I mean when I say we need more fire. We need more of the good fire. We need to go back in those forests and have those good fires. Some indigenous communities across the world call that cold fire. It means that we need to burn and reduce the undergrowth and allow for new vegetation, green vegetation to come back. Another aspect comes touchdowns to, it's controversial, I know, but touchdown to beavers. And when I talk about fire reintroduction and also beaver reintroduction or help, it touches to a very growing field of conservation science that is called rewilding. And why are beavers interesting? Well, beavers, they store water. You can see here, that's around Fort McMurray after the 2016 fire. Here you have one beaver dam here, another one here, the lodge, number of canals here that the beavers use to go and forage around. And you can see here it's burned, but all the beaver dam complex stayed green. And we have increasing evidence in the US of the interest of beaver dams and beaver dam complexes to be used as kind of refugia. They stay green and they can really store and protect the water during and after fire. They actually can help post-fire regrowth and post-fire, that vegetation dynamics. So that's something that is, as I said, growing in attention, and maybe at some point in Canada we will get to that as well. And if those things doesn't work, if dealing with your if dealing with reducing the wildfire hazard in your catchment doesn't work, or you think it's not enough, or maybe you want to work on other things as well, you can also work downstream. You can work on your water treatment process, for instance. You can just be okay, if we want to account for wildfire hazard upstream, what should we do? And here, that's just a general representation of the classical water treatment process. But in this paper, Preparing for Wildfires in Extreme Weather, the authors provide a number of ideas or processes that can be implemented to limit the vulnerability of those downstream water treatment plants. So that's also something you can do, some retrofits, some upgrades. And there would be a number of others to do. Okay, so I'm reaching. It's already been quite a lot of information. I'm sure, and my English is not that good today. I'm sorry about that. But it's time to complete on a few remarks. Here, that just like this. This figure here sums up what I talked about today, and I'd be more than happy to provide the paper as well that talks about that. But you see, like your watershed is going to burn, and the way it functions is going to burn. Forest won't be able to fulfill its different functions that protects water supply. So the water is going to change. Water quality, water hydrology, water availability in the end is going to change, and it's going to be much more difficult potentially to provide water or to ensure a number of like the provision of a number of water ecosystem services, so drinking water, fisheries, and things like that. But we do know a lot. That's something that is important as well, and I really want you to keep in mind. It's not like we're clueless. Yeah, we sure have a lot of things to do. We don't have enough data. We have much more research to do, but we do have scientific knowledge to mitigate, to reduce our like the risk of wildfires to water security and general water supply. Obviously, climate change is on the way. I mean, it's ongoing, but it's not the only change that we have to face. We have increasing fire activity, obviously, here. We also have more and more people in the landscape. When we have more people, it means we have more fire, we have more values at risk, like more possibilities to actually have structures that will burn and pollute our streams. It also means that we have more water demand, so we're going to have less water and with higher risk on this water. In the prairies, I know it probably is the same in BC as well, but we have less water availability just because our glaciers are shrinking. We have less water available, and like the predictions like look pretty dire in terms of downstream water availability. And we're also going to have more and more rainfall, like extreme rainfall. Like remember, after a fire, like a condition to have, like in the recipe for disaster, a condition we have is we need rainstorms, and we're gonna have more and more of those rainstorms with time, and we already see more and more of those rainstorms. So everything looks pretty bad. I mean, by the end of this talk, it can be like things look pretty bad. But as I said, we do have the science, we have the knowledge, and the great thing is that if you want to know more about fires, we have this recent United Nations Environment Program publication in which we made sure to talk more. It's actually incredible because I was invited to write about the section on water security, and this is great because 10 years ago you wouldn't have a section on water security on fire reports. So we've come a long way when it comes to having people realizing that fire and water fire can impact water pretty badly, but also can be part of the solution. And if you want to know more, there is like a couple of publications here, like recent publications of mine, in which you can find what I talked about today and even more. And I'd be, as I said, more than happy to provide like any document that you may want to read. And with that, I'm very grateful again for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to discussing with you about this topic.
Francois, thank you so much. That there was a lot of information in there, and I know
Sure.
I took in as much as I could, a fair bit of it, and certainly, it's a concern for all of us in the area. I guess I'd like to know if you could sum up. I mean, what we're doing here is kind of local government, the Shuswap Watershed area. What are some of the steps that you think we might be able to take to help protect our communities and our watersheds and our forests from some of these effects?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think I'm increasingly trying to work in what we call socio-hydrology. So like it sounds pretty barbaric, but the idea is just to have, when it comes to water governance, is like trying to make sure that we have people around the table and the different people who are involved in the watershed. And I assume in your watershed council, you have like a fair number of different voices, that are concerned with water supply. So I think a way to start is, like for each of those stakeholders, like trying to voice, what is their potential concern, and I think like then, like doing what I just did right now, like trying to invite a few people to talk about like some of those issues with you guys, and I think that's a good way to start. Like is the concern legit, and what is it, and like is it possible for people like me and others to answer some of your questions, at least from a theoretical standpoint. I think a second step that is not necessarily too complicated is like what I showed on the few slides on the Shuswap water basin and like the fire history. I think if you have somebody who is like kind of savvy with like some of the softwares I use, like GIS, like those mapping kind of tools, you can collect a fair bit of data that are open access through the government of British Columbia, federal government, and being able to collect some of those data. You can also ask people like myself or others, like what can be done in terms of collaboration, so we can provide you with some guidance as to data that can be. It doesn't need to be complicated. Like I'm not even. Did you see before like something like as I showed, like just like the fire history, like a simple fire history on the Shuswap? Was it the first time you saw something like that, or it's something you've seen before?
I have not seen that myself. No.
Yeah, so and it took me a few like 15 minutes to put together, and what I mean is just like it's something that has a huge communication value, and that you can put together like fairly quickly. And I mean, obviously I'm biased, that's what I do on a daily basis, but it's what I mean is that's really something you can do. You have the data, and I invite you to look into the work that was done by the city of Victoria. They have pretty good documentation. They've done like their source water protection plan. So the city of Victoria, but also Edmonton and Calgary, they have their source water protection plans, and they go through this fire history. And I think that's something that can be very, very valuable, and you don't need to go in like complicated stuff. And just start with that, talking to people and get like what you can get in terms of data and simple fire history.
Great. And just from listening to you, it sounds like controlled burns are maybe something that hasn't been in place in practice for many years. Is that something that we should lobby for, or?
Oh yes, oh absolutely. Like so, I work with a few fire practitioners in BC, and it's so hard to implement a prescribed burn. There is a lot of regulation, what is the word, like hurdles. So it's not that easy to burn, despite the fact that we increasingly say, we know it's good. We have historical proofs, that it works, but it's pretty hard to implement. But certainly it is something to do. A good example, I mentioned Denver in Colorado, and Denver, since the Hammond fires 20 years ago, has implemented a whole program for their watershed protection that includes the use of prescribed burns. And Colorado has many programs, with the working with watershed councils like you guys, and trying to implement those prescribed burn programs upstream. So it is definitely something that you need to, in my opinion, that you need to advocate for.
Marvelous. Okay, anybody else want to jump in here? Dennis?
Yeah, thanks, Francois. So you're talking about burns. Like, so the problem we have here is we only have a small window that we can actually burn, and we got lots and lots of ground to burn now, I guess. And that you mentioned getting the data, so we could prioritize what and where needs to be burned. That's kind of the steps we go to. And you had mentioned that there's a lot of stumbling blocks for us to, I know trying to get forestry or anybody else to do prescribed burns, the only ones they're doing is the trial runs, and we're too late for trial runs. So any idea how we could speed it up? And we've got a group of us here, and I think right now all of BC is interested in burning, if they had their ear to the ground. So how do we accelerate that? Just some hints. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. And well, I think like first of all, what I can do afterwards is like send an email to Erin, like the contact of Robert Gray, was a fire practitioner and like prescribed fire practitioner that was advocating for prescribed burn in BC and try to do as much as he can. And what I'm going to say right now really comes from discussing with him, like as I mentioned, prime of regulation. It's like it's pretty hard to get like the paperwork and like the number of people involved in the decision making, like makes it pretty hard to actually to get to get the authorization. So that's the first thing. There is an issue of liability as well, and we have probably like, especially in we get a lot of information from the US, and liability is a big thing. It's if either if you're a fire like a prescribed burn practitioner, either if you're a private owner who tries to burn by himself, even though you have like the knowledge, like if something happens, people like who do this kind of jobs feel like they are not protected enough. It's just dealing with fire, even though you're trying to do your best. Well, sometimes, especially in mountainous areas, for instance, you can have a sudden change in weather and the fire can get out of control. But once again, like those are accidents that are fairly rare compared to what like we have the examples from southern Australia. That Southern Australia has a ton of burning. Like they have a crew. We had the visit of a crew not so long ago. They burn so much. They have so much prescribed burn they have a huge prescribed burn program. They go to make people accept those burn programs. They go like on during farmers market and they chat with people. They have a booth, and so there is like this aspect. I guess like here I'm making connection to another point. Like so like liability, legislation, regulation, but also people's acceptance. For a lot of people, fire still looks pretty bad. You don't want to see fire, don't want the smoke, and so you need to. I don't necessarily like the word educate, but you need to communicate. You need to raise awareness and to improve fire literacy for people. Like just to be sure that like okay, we're burning because we need to burn, but that's the good fire, and that's what we're trying to advocate for. So yeah, like communicate with people, change the regulation, and like try to work on the liabilities, and maybe the actually insurance companies can have a role here trying to make that easier to happen. But it's an ongoing conversation, and as I said, I can put you guys in contact with Bob Gray, whose job it is, and we can provide you with so much more information. He's very passionate about it.
Yeah, I think getting Bob Gray's contact would be great. Mm-hmm. Insurance companies for sure. They should be all over this as well. And I never thought of it. Lately in the last 5 years, I've definitely come to the conclusion that we have to do more good burning. Mm-hmm. But I also realize there's probably a lot of people who don't think that way yet, and that's a good point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Well, I've got one. Francois, I'm thinking about the forest companies, and they're out there with cut blocks and doing some cleanups and things like that. Would it be valuable to have them burn those cut blocks after they've done the logging?
Yeah, I think like right now the state of science when it comes to burning after logging, and like what are the practices basically to mix fire and logging are kind of still debated, like hotly debated. But I think there is like it seems to like fire ecologists would tell you that yes, like it would be good after logging to actually burn the residues on the ground. Well, first of all, because residues can be pretty bad. Like you cut everything, you let all the fine fuel on the floor, and fine fuel, when there is a fire, fine fuels like the twigs and leaves, and like really what drives the the fire front, how it moves forward,
Yeah.
it's because of these fine fuels. And usually after forest operations, they leave all this fine fuel on the ground. And so when we have a lot of cut blocks throughout the landscape, it creates this kind of fuel connectivity, like this kind of fuel, like all network. And when it starts to burn, well, then it's going to go through those cut blocks like pretty fast. It can, at least. But so I think like burning could definitely reduce the fine fuel after logging, but it can also help to emulate, like that, kind of mimic the natural role of fires on those areas. So like if you burn, then like the nutrients are going to go back, a number of nutrients, minerals, like a number of things are going to go back to the soil as well. So I think that probably is a good practice, and I've read several occasions that what should be the case. And I don't know what is the position of the logging industry on that at all. Maybe it's something they don't want to talk about. Maybe it is something they would be open to. But as I mentioned before, the issues of liabilities can be something they don't, they're too scared of something happening. So, but I think, that should, I think in fire ecology, we think overall that we should burn after logging, probably.
Yeah, it's probably a cost for them, so they'd prefer not to do that. But on the other hand, it might be valuable in terms of, well, safety and other things. So yeah, that's an interesting concept. Got some people in the chat room here. Yeah. Dennis says, I think this is well beyond interface areas. There was a lot of fuel left by the pine beetle, for example, that was available for the fires last year.
Like mountain pine beetle, like it connects to this well, obviously climate change, like the seasons are longer, warmer, just like much better for the like all those pests to proliferate to yep. Just like but also I mentioned the problem of fire exclusion. It was very well documented in California, is that because of fire exclusion, we have so much vegetation, and vegetation at some point starts to compete for the water that is available. And because they start to compete, they start to being stressed, and so they are much more susceptible to drought and pests. And so you have this kind of domino kind of effect that starts, and you have much more dry fuel, dead trees in the landscape. And like pine beetles become like one of the numerous type of little disturbances that kind of get together to create this kind of massive conflagrations. And definitely an added problem.
What else we got here?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Nope, that's great. I see algae growth is a big concern. You mentioned rivers, but what about the impacts in large water bodies such as Shuswap Lake?
The problem with algae growth is definitely. So in rivers, usually we're going to have we won't have this kind of big, like I mentioned, this kind of gooey kind of layer of algae. Like it's more like in lakes that will happen. Like a number of things can, like the occurrence of, I think that the occurrence of an algal bloom and issues of what we call eutrophication, and it's definitely it's usually happens in like still water bodies, like open water bodies like lakes and ponds. I would say that for the Shuswap Lake, I guess it would depend when it happens around the lake, how close to the lake it happens, how like if you're thinking in terms of recreational activities, for instance, like how close to those areas used for like let's say like bathing, swimming, it happens. It can definitely be a concern depending on the season, water temperature, I guess my point is just like the lake is fairly big, so it can be a problem, not over the whole lake, and it will probably be kind of localized around the lake. But yes, it can surely become a problem. Yes.
Mike has a comment here that's interesting me. It says indigenous burning practices are an option. As we advance reconciliation, I think there are more opportunities for First Nations to lead prescribed burns. I'm not sure, I guess personally, what the difference is, or how an indigenous burning practices it would be different than prescribed burns.
Well, it's not necessarily. I don't think it's like that different. Besides maybe like all the traditional and cultural aspect. And I'm not a specialist, so I don't take what I'm saying for for gospel. But I think in the end, like for indigenous practices, there is a whole lot that comes as well. Like obviously hazard reduction, as we do for prescribed burning, but there is also a whole lot coming with a whole lot of things related to their traditional lifestyle. So there are like some ceremonies that come with like the use of fire. There is also like the possibility to regrow a number of food sources in the forests. So I think like the use of fire for us, the use of prescribed fire usually is limited to reducing fire hazards most of the time. But for indigenous, the use of burning is like goes much further than that. But once again, I'm not a specialist, and probably some people I know could probably tell you much more about that. Bob Gray actually could.
I see some more hands up here. Dennis, are you still asking questions? Okay.
Yeah. So Francois, after a fire, and the fire is quite extreme, and our portions are moderate, or some are minor, are there ways to help the soil bounce back? You know, an extreme fire, of course, everything's baked. I can't see if there was anything we could do to help. Well, two things: help the soil come back, but probably more importantly, help it mitigate the impact it has on our waters. Thank you.
Yeah, so like there are several options, and some are pretty expensive, some are pretty cheap. But yeah, like in areas where it has burned pretty badly, pretty severely, what can be done first is like there are a number of erosion mitigation systems. So some are just like using the logs that are standing, just to cut them, and you put them like perpendicular to the slope to collect a number of the sediments on those hill slopes. Pretty cheap way to go and pretty efficient. You can also, in some places I've seen like quick, it's more expensive obviously, but like some communities building some small kind of retention basins, not necessarily for drinking water, but just downstream and some of the parts along the river, just like trying to collect this extra sediment and extra water. So creating this kind of small sedimentations or water collection basins. You can also apply mulch on many of the burn scars. And there are different type of mulch, you know, like simple wood chips. Some people put straw mulch. There is what we call hydro mulch, which is also quite expensive, and from as far as I know, not that much more efficient. And you can also go with like some reforestation activities, you know, trying to reseed. Reseeding as seems to have like limited efficiency, but you can still try to reseed. You can, as I said, like try reforestation, go and plant trees. You can definitely help the watershed to get back in a better shape.
Thanks.
Kim.
Thanks, Jay. You'd mentioned that there's increased risk with snowmelt after fire, and what risk of washouts and also snowmelt. I'm just wondering if you would have any information as to whether that risk is mitigated or increased with post-fire harvesting.
Oh, you mean like salvage logging, like getting? Oh, okay. That's a very good question. I can't answer. I don't know. I have a couple of articles in mind that I think talk about it, because what happens usually is like it depends on the size of the burn patches. If you have small patches, usually it will help accumulate more snow, because you will have less effect of wind. You will have less effect of sun rays, you know, sun warmth. So usually bigger burn scars are where snow accumulation is lower and when it melts faster. But we also realized, interestingly, that those burn snags that stays in place. If you look at a few pictures, you will see that the snow around those snags, those burn snags, it melts faster than the rest because those burn logs, because they're black, they absorb so much more heat, and so they make the snow around them to just melt faster. So I'm just it's a thought experiment almost, but like if I'm going down this path, I would say, well, okay, so maybe if it has been salvage log, then you have less of this effect from burn snags is lower or doesn't exist anymore. That said, we have enough knowledge now to like still debated, but like salvage logging usually doesn't do very well in burn catchments. Usually like those snags usually will provide still some sort of soil protection. It will still like limit erosion, still hold like a little bit of sediments. And so what we've seen in Alberta, for instance, after salvage logging is that water quality goes bad, worse than just like fire plus salvage logging has a worse result in terms of water quality and erosion and hydrology than there is for just a burn. So I guess my point is just like, yeah, maybe it could limit snow melt, but I don't think in the big scheme of things, I don't think that's a good thing. But good question. I'm not sure what my answer is. I'm gonna be honest here.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Francois. Mike, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thanks, Francois, for your presentation. Really thought-provoking, and I'm just thinking about all the connections with all these other pieces beyond just the Watershed Council. But the thought that I have, and the question for you is, we coordinate a lot of different water quality monitors, and they monitor a whole bunch of different parameters. But we tend to focus on nutrients and phosphorus in particular. But I'm just thinking about, turbidity. And I'm wondering, like, is turbidity something that maybe we should be post-wildfire, like after last year, keeping our eye on, or what parameters do you think we should definitely be watching for?
Yes, absolutely. Turbidity, you can look into dissolved oxygen, like phosphorus and nitrogen, obviously. Dissolved organic carbon, big thing, both for aquatic habitats, but also for drinking water treatment. You could look into some heavy metals. Mercury is a big thing, especially because mercury is a tricky one because a lot of mercury is goes up in smoke, is usually doesn't stay in the watershed, but a part of it stays in the watershed and can be eroded and comes downstream. But also I mentioned the problem of smoke, and we are going to have more and more like smokier and smokier summers and more smoke deposition. And smoke, holds a lot of mercury, a lot of iron. Mercury can be pretty bad when it gets in contact with water because it gets changed, and it's easier for fish and like for aquatic ecosystems to absorb it. And if you guys fish yourself and eat the salmon that you fish, you might potentially eat mercury, and you don't want to have that in your body. Iron as well can be something you want to monitor. But it's nutrients is classic one, but yeah, dissolved oxygen and turbidity as well, obviously. Those ones are good, yes.
Okay, Francois, I don't see anybody else here, and I certainly want to thank you very much, and I'm sure you got other things you can do. So I'm going to let you go, but before you go, if you wouldn't mind, in a couple of sentences, just kind of telling us what our next step should be.
All right. Well, next step, you guys sit around the table, talk about your fire concerns. I'm sure you guys all have different ideas and concerns related to fire, and get a fire history together for the Shuswap Basin. And if you have some questions about that, I'd be happy to provide data sets and some guidance more. But get your fire history together for the Shuswap Basin.
Marvelous. Great. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been very interesting and enlightening and scaring and
I
various
know.
other things. So enjoy the rest of your day. And
Thank
we
you
look
very
forward to
much.
talking to you again. You bet.
Thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Francois.
Francois.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francois.
And thanks everybody for coming.
Erin, I will send you an email probably tomorrow with like some references and like some contacts. All right.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. You take care.
Okay, bye for now.